All right, this is going to be a very exciting session. I'm super pleased to be introducing Eric Williams to you all from the Mac at IBM team. And Eric, Eric's going to go ahead and introduce the rest of his staff. Now, I will want to point out that we will expect that there's going to be a lot of questions coming out of this session and also from Fletcher's session this morning. There is a Twitter hashtag, which is on the slide that Eric is going to advance to right now. There we go. So the JNUC 2016 IBM, if you have questions, please feed them into Twitter, and we will be able to address all of those at the end of the session. And with that, over to you, Eric.
Hi. Thank you. My name is Eric Williams. I manage the Mac at IBM Engineering team. My team is responsible for all technical aspects of the Mac at IBM project. Today we're going to go over a few kind of very specific technical challenges that we had, some best practices that we've kind of discovered along the way. But you know, as you mentioned, we're definitely very happy to talk about any aspect of the Mac at IBM program in general at the end. So the first thing we're going to go over is an infrastructure overview. Tom Larkin is our infrastructure engineer, so he'll go over that. Followed by monitoring and metrics. Patrick Norton does our monitoring. He'll go over that. And then the events API, Ryan Gorman is our lead platform engineer. He'll go over the API. And then the policy model, that'll be done by both Ryan and Tom Lenz. And then the QA process, which will be done by JD Palmer. He's our QA engineer.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Larkin. Hey, guys. So our infrastructure at a high-level overview is basically these bullet points. Every server runs Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We are 100% Linux backend. We have 4 environments in our infrastructure, and each environment does a specific thing. Our environments are QA, production, engineering, and then our tools environment. And we designed all the servers to do dedicated specific roles. Each thing also has redundancy with some failover. And this is kind of a mock-up of what our production might look like. And so if you can kind of see on this diagram here, we have 2 avenues of connecting to our infrastructure. One is a client Mac, right? So our customers out in IBM who run self-service, or we deploy compliance to them. They will connect through a different VIP than a business unit or a tool that uses the API. And we do this to split traffic out. So if we mess up on a tool and we bring down Tomcat, we have no impact to our clients. Our clients can still launch self-service. They can still get policies, and we'll fix our issue, and there's no impact to the service. And right under there, you'll see that there are basically 3 Tomcat clusters. One's dedicated to client connections. One's dedicated to all API callbacks, API workflows. It's also the admin UI, because our help desk uses the UI to troubleshoot, tickets, calls, emails. They might have to go in and cancel out a pending NDM command. And then our master web app is off to the side. And we designed it this way because the master web app, if you're familiar with how the JSS works, has special functions. And we just want to it to be left alone. So no one logs into the master, no one touches it, so it can do its thing. Everything connects to a master MySQL server. And we have 2 replicas for redundancy. It's pretty standard. Off to the left here, you'll see that we have an Apache redirect. And the reason we do that is so under maintenance or, say, an upgrade, we flip, a little image file on Apache that tells people, hey, we're under maintenance. So if they go to setupmymac.com or setupmymac.ibm.com, they get a nice little message saying, hey, we're under maintenance. Like, you can't enroll right now because we're under maintenance, and that way they don't call the help desk. And then on to the right side here, this is our middleware system. So all the events from the Events API plugin get sent to a web processor, which stores them in this middleware database. We have some tools that do callbacks to get information. The middleware system is used for several things. My other coworkers are going to go into that a bit later. And then on the outside, we have Nagios. And Nagios talks to everything. It goes out and gets metrics, everything from the standard, CPU load, disk I/O, memory, to some more specific like Tomcat threads, database connections. And we use some of the built-in stuff, and we use some custom tooling in Python and Bash that we wrote, and Pat will talk about that later. And so people ask me a lot, like, how do you scale? And so this is kind of, my presentation will kind of lead into Pat's. And, we scale based off these metrics, these tools, these numbers, and off the events. So we can see, okay, if we're doing 1,000 inventories a minute, that has this resource cost tied to it. And this is basically how we designed our new infrastructure. Oh, which all infrastructure is hosted by IBM software. And Pat's up next. Thank you.
So that's a pretty complex infrastructure. How do we keep track of it all? We use Nagios as a monitoring system, and we collect a lot of metrics. How are monitoring and metrics different? Monitoring provides us with alerts when certain criteria or thresholds are met. Disk is full, too many processes running, load balancer down, that sort of thing. Metrics are historical data that we collect that we use for business intelligence purposes. We're currently using Nagios for all of this, but we're exploring a few other systems, New Relic being one of those. Why do we monitor and collect? As Tom mentioned, scaling, planning, and infrastructure health. We monitor, we need to have the historical data to understand the patterns of JSS load, how often we're running recons, our extension attributes, what sort of stuff we're storing in the database. It helps us attempt to forecast that future load and make informed decisions about what we're going to do in the future, whether we need more servers, whether we need more disk space, that sort of thing. What do we monitor? On the system resources side, we monitor things like disk, swap space, number of processes running on those servers, number of users connected, CPU, memory. On the network side, we're looking at things like ping times, ability to SSH, APNS checks, availability for our servers to access Symantec's PKI portal. On the database side, we're looking at MySQL connection times, slave lag, slow queries, number of database threads. And finally, web app health. We run a few checks against the Tomcats, depending on their role, whether they're enabled or disabled, just to make sure that somebody didn't do something silly. And a few other things like how many Tomcat threads are running. How do we monitor? Like I said before, we use Nagios currently. In particular, we've installed a plugin for Nagios called the Nagios Remote Plugin Executor. This allows us to run checks not only against the server, but from the server directly. This is important because if you're just Nagios doesn't really have an agent, so you can't just send a call over HTTP to that server and get information based on those local things like CPU and RAM. It also allows us to execute checks from the server to another service. So each Tomcat server can go and make sure that it has access to APNS and PKI. We've also installed a couple community plugins, like a MySQL plugin, CPU and RAM monitoring plugins. We also have written custom plugins, both in Bash and Python. We'll see a little bit of an example of one of those in a further slide. We've written another custom plugin for handling the events processing. It counts how many events are going on, as well as tracking threads and processes. So this is a pretty standard example of what Nagios looks like. This is all of our servers here on the left-hand side. It's really plain. It's kind of boring, actually. They're all green, which is good. Status is up. We see a few other useful pieces of information, like when it was last checked, the duration of how long that server has been in the particular state, and some human-readable information from the output of the plugin on the right-hand side there. This is a screenshot of one single server. Here again, we see the check, the actual name of the check on the left-hand side. The status, again, okay. The last time the check was run, duration, and then whether that status is in an alert or not. Nagios lets you set how many times that alert before it actually sends you an alert. So 1 of 3, if it had reached an alert threshold, you'd see 2 of 3, 3 of 3, and on 3 of 3 it would send the message. This is an example of a custom plugin written in Bash. The URL is at the bottom of this slide. You guys can check it out if you want. Few interesting points. Nagios, basically, these plugins, it deals basically by exit code. So depending on the exit code in this series of if-else statements determines what Nagios, how it handles the status of the plugin. So exit 0 would be okay, 1 is a warning, 2 is critical, 3 is unknown. It's very simple to deal with. If you look at the output equals section, this is what gets displayed in Nagios. Everything before the pipe is the human readable output that we saw 2 slides ago, and everything after that is considered performance data, and that gets logged by a plugin called PNP for Nagios. The toughest part of alerts and monitoring is actually figuring out what those thresholds are. Set them too low, you're constantly getting emails and SMS messages about whatever it is that you've decided to set that threshold for. So it's a tough balance. As the infrastructure grows, you're constantly adjusting those thresholds. You can choose how to send your notifications. We use both email and SMS depending on the severity of the alert. SMS wakes me up. Email doesn't wake me up. Let's see here. Which metrics do we collect? Check-ins, inventories, policies, enrollments from the Events API. On the system side, we're looking at things like CPU, RAM, disk I/O, LDAP connections, Tomcat threads, database connection threads and queries per second, network ping times, as well as service availability. How do we make sense of all this data? Well, we graph it using PNP for Nagios, and we use that historical data to analyze trends and identify changes. If somebody's made a policy change, all of a sudden we start seeing big spikes in the graph at certain times of the day. We're going to be curious about what somebody did. This is a screenshot of a simple dashboard that we put together. The top 4 are our events. So we'll see things like check-ins, inventories, how many policies have run and how many enrollments have occurred. This is run on a 1-minute interval. On the bottom is a few systems items, response times for the ping to each of the Tomcats, how many LDAP connections are open, and how many Tomcat threads are open on each Tomcat server, and the number of database connection threads open on the MySQL master. Here's just a couple screenshots of some graphs that show more interesting metrics. The top graph is a large spike in enrollments. Middle graph is a 5-week time period of queries per second on the database. And the bottom thread is, or the bottom graph is a very, very busy database. It capped out at 300 threads for like 2.5 hours. So it's good to know when those things happen. These graphs allow us the ability to identify trends between the metrics. Seeing all 8 of them up there together, it's pretty easy to draw conclusions. These screenshots here are from when we were having a few issues as we were planning to scale to our current environment. You can see that the database was really busy and it was causing some issues with some of the other metrics that we track. What are we looking to do in the future? This is great now, but we can always improve, right? We're looking at a more interactive dashboard. We're looking at sending more data to New Relic and experiment with that. We're looking at Akamai integration. We use Akamai for our distribution point. So Akamai has an API. We'd love to include some of their traffic data on our dashboard as well. We'd like to break up the policy events. Currently, we only track how many policies are executed, not what has occurred during that policy event, as well as any additional metrics that we can think of. Ryan's going to come on and show you a proof of concept of our new interactive dashboard. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Pat. So yeah, so we collect a lot of matrix, and we store a lot of data. And you know, those Nagios spreadsheets that Pat showed and he put together are great, but they're not as pretty as we'd like. So we took kind of a challenge to see if we could find something a little prettier. We looked around at some open source stuff, and what we settled on was a product called Tipboard. So using the JSS API, we can get information like how many policies, how many scripts and packages we currently have in the database. Using the events, which populate information into our middleware database, we can do things like what does our current OS deployment look like by version, how many Sierra machines we've deployed, and what are the model breakdowns. So it really gives us a little bit prettier picture that we could possibly show management, because those Nagios graphs are more for us dorks. So as we mentioned, Pat mentioned, Tom mentioned, we use the Events API. So what does that give us? That gives us simple XML JSON files that we can collect in real time. And we can take event-based actions on that. So what does that look like? Well, we collect our enrollments, our check-ins, our inventories, and our policies. All those events are sent to our middleware system, and that middleware system sorts it and processes it. And as I mentioned on the actions, we actually do take actions against inventory. So anytime an inventory event comes in, we go back to the JSS through an API call, collect the latest inventory, and put it in our middleware database, our reporting database. That database is open to other teams to collect data. So instead of hitting our JSS and bogging down our JSS, they go to the middleware. And so that's worked out really well for us. Policy model. So we had some challenges when we first started the program. Our community is very vocal. They want everything available in the store at all times. They also want to know what they have installed, what they don't have installed. They also want updates, and they want to get notified of those updates. So we had to come up with a policy model that would scale, that we didn't have to have a hard time troubleshooting, have a hard time updating and managing, because at the time we were a lot smaller team. And this is what it looks like. So for every application that we install, we have 4 policies. We have an install policy, we have a reinstall policy, we have an update policy, and we have a main policy. Now, the install and reinstall policies are controlled by a smart group. You either have the application installed or you don't. With the update, we added the version. So therefore, if you have the app and the proper version, you can get an update policy. All those policies are pretty much dumb. They call a trigger, they call the main trigger. The main policy has all of the packages, all the scripts, all the heavy workload. So anything that needs to be done for the installation is all controlled in the main. And I'll have Tom Lentz show you how he keeps it up to date.
All right, so this is what somebody that's logging into our JSS would see when we go to update a policy. We're looking at Firefox, and we can see that we actually have 4 policies here. That first one is that all-important main policy. This is where our actual packages, any scripts that we have, in this case the doc icon, because everyone needs their doc icon, and an inventory at the end. This is called back with a custom trigger, and these 3 next policies all use that custom trigger to go back and go to this main. So next one down, install, again, main, Firefox trigger on that, reinstall, and the updates. So it's very simple for us to go in and edit this, drop a new package in. If that package doesn't work, we always go back to that main and make our adjustment. Also making an adjustment in a script if we need to make an adjustment there. So what does the user actually see? We actually get to see something very similar to what hopefully everyone gets to see in version 10 when that comes out. So taking a look, we have box edit and box sync right in the middle. And you notice they both say reinstall. So these would be a clue to the end user that they currently have that application, and they have the ability to reinstall it. Up at the top, we have Acrobat Reader. That one says install, indicating to the user that they don't currently have this, and they could install. So very simple for the end user to see what they have, what they don't have, and what they can do to get these. Click install. We also have updates. This was a huge request for us, and what we've actually done is made the updates the default category when you open up the Mac at IBM App Store or self-service. So the user will see these, they'll see the updates available, all again calling back to that main. And we've also provided updates all button. It will actually run through and execute all of the updates for the user, because sometimes users' machines look just like this. They haven't updated anything in a very long time. But the key to it is, all goes back to that main policy. So we don't have to update a whole bunch of policies to get these to show. We update one, maybe a description here and there, and we have something like this that users are very happy to go in and use and update, and we just need to make sure it works. And to do that, we typically lean on our QA environment and JD, who is in charge of QA. So he'll talk to you a little bit about that.
Hello. All right. Process and methodology is really exciting. We're going to talk a little bit about QA. So a lot about how we make sure things work is about how we work as a team. So we're an agile development team, which means we're constantly listening to feedback and providing iterative change to the product. We're always looking to improve features or process. We have weekly and monthly deliverables that we track over 2-week sprints. Everything that we do gets documented via our Agile Project Management tool. And we're lucky enough to have a really great project manager who keeps us focused on meeting our goals, so much so that we brought her with us to make sure we didn't mess this one up. Thank you, Pam. So QA for us is really about not an engineering check, right? Does X do Y is just making sure it did what you thought it was going to do. But the Q is for quality, right? So we're looking to make enhancements to what we're offering for our customers. The most important thing for us and the biggest metric we have is customer satisfaction, right? So I think you heard iterated many times today, experience and satisfaction, right? So we want to make sure people are pleased with what we offer. Let's take a look at how we actually do business. Here's kind of an example of what everything goes through. So when we accept work and it's assigned to a development engineer, they build, and then when they're ready to have it broken, to test it, they'll assign a QA task to me. And so at that time, I'll build the test case with the development engineer. We work together to do that. And at that time, I'm really trying to understand the process or feature that the development engineer has built. And so that's prime time for us to do documentation. And that's usually when we do that as well, whether that be internal engineering documentation or whether that be documentation that goes out to end users directly or to our help desks so that they understand what's happening or they have back-end insight into what we're doing. We do engineering checks generally on virtual machines, but all QA is actually done on physical machines from our lab, and we're fortunate enough to have one of every series that we have in service to test against. And sometimes we'll just test it on a single, sometimes we'll run it on everything that we have depending on what we're releasing. I also like to envision unique scenarios that our customers might find themselves in and try to break all of the things that my other teammates build. So I'm not looking forward to a lot of holiday cards this year. Social is a big deal at IBM. So we have a really big community of Apple users, and they're also Apple fans, as Ryan and Tom were talking about. Community is very vocal. We are fortunate enough also to have a community coordinator who works with them to generate feedback. And a subsect of that big Apple community is a private community called the Mac Community Council. It has about 840 members. And these are gracious volunteers who test the things that we are releasing before general release. So as you see, you move through. Once it's approved, we go to pilot, and they're going to do it for us. We really appreciate how eager they are to help us out with that. We listen to our community for feedback. We listen to our help desks for feedback. What we are trying to do is make everything as great as it can be. And sometimes that means we file feature enhancements against our own releases, right? So iterating to make the product better and to give the best possible customer experience that we can give. Down the road for us would probably be some test automation. We've been looking at a few toys to play with in that realm so we can maybe automate some of the more mundane things. And that's kind of where we're headed down the road. So I'm going to pass it back. Eric. Thank you, everyone.
So we have a few questions off of Twitter, so we'll go through those first. I think we'll definitely have time to go through the room as well for a few because there are only, I think, a handful of questions.
We just
here.
have a handful of questions here. Okay, so for the first one, let's go back to the beginning here. The question is about the IBM Enrollment App V2 and whether it's going to be available to others to customize for their experiences.
Okay, Fletcher, you want me to take this one? Enrollment version 2, we work really hard on that. I think it will be available to customers via GTS and other arms of IBM, I believe that'll be the only way to get it for now.
Excellent. The question is regarding how you are dealing with the cost savings from your Macs, is whether you are leasing or purchasing.
Okay, so right now we do purchase all of our Macs. So we purchase all of our Macs this way that IBM has always done it. I think we have looked into leasing and we'll continue to evaluate, but we right now are just purchasing the Macs. Do you want to come?
Okay, and I think this one probably comes out a little bit from this morning's conversation as well. It's someone who's explaining that they have a large enough deployment to need a solution very similar to this for both their Mac and their PC deployment, but I believe they're feeling a little understaffed. They're lacking the resources. Do you have any ideas on how they might want to work towards fixing that?
Sure, so this was a big problem for us last year, and actually I think we talked a lot about this. So if you remember, Mac at IBM started with really just Danielle, myself, and a few others in the room, and I was the only kind of technical person in the room. As my team will tell you, I can come up with the ideas, but I can't do anything about it. So, it's a difficult place to be if you're understaffed. We actually relied heavily on a lot of partners. You can reach out to folks like IBM, GTS, Jamf Pro Services, Apple Pro Services. We leveraged pretty much everywhere that we could to do this, as well as Jamf Nation. I mean, if you have the kind of idea of what you want to do, like a lot of times you do end up on Jamf Nation, you can find a lot of information on how to do something. Obviously, the work still has to get done. So at some point, we found it easier to pull in help for just a short period of time. If you're reaching out to consulting, you can have them for a week, 2 weeks, versus hiring someone, which can be, kind of cost prohibitive.
Awesome. Your middleware system that you were just talking about, is that an off-the-shelf or a custom-developed product?
It is custom. Ryan can talk about it.
Yeah, so it's a SQL database, pretty much off the shelf, but we wrote all the custom code that handles the events and injects the data into the database.
Excellent. And then there was another question of, again, about your middleware implementation, wondering whether it was used for software asset utilization or reporting?
You want to do that?
It's the middleware system, right?
Middleware, okay.
So the middleware system is used for several things. I can give one example of another internal team I worked with requested a certain piece of data from us. And so we built a tool that basically sent the data to the middleware system. And that's one of the uses for it. So like Ryan was saying earlier, other teams can connect to it to get data. We want to keep people off of production systems because there's a cost, right? Every time you access a production system, there's a cost. And if we can reduce the fingerprint and put it somewhere else, it doesn't impact our customers or the production environment. We also use it for our own tooling, and we use it for some other workflows. If you want to talk about those. No.
So quickly, IBM does have a single point of record for all the systems. We do use this system to go into that system. So we do have a single point of record for all systems. That system comes to us and gets that data. So you don't come to the JSS for any of that data. There's a separate system for asset management.
Excellent. I think you're going to hand this one over to JD, because the question is regarding your QA. And what do you use to manage your test cases?
We are currently in between tools for that. I think that's a polite way to put that, although we are looking at several options. So we're doing it old school for the moment. So
You have some very nice spreadsheets.
I have the best spreadsheets.
It's hardcore.
the best spreadsheets. There's color coded and everything.
So I have a feeling that you may have just answered this next question as well then. Do you have any specific workflow testing software to validate your results?
Oh, same. It's the same.
Same hardcore answer. Fantastic. Excellent. Next one is about your usage of DEP, and is asking just generally, asking how you deliver the Jamf agent with DEP, but I guess, that's really kind of more of a, how are you working with DEP? There we go, we'll rephrase it.
Sure, so DEP, kind of the native implementation, or at least the way that Jamf's implemented it, if you integrate with DEP, that's going to come down at some point, right? So you enroll in DEP, we've integrated with our LDAP, you go through, if you've seen the enrollment video, you authenticate via your IBM Intranet credentials. At that point, it'll reach out to the JSS, it starts to pull down the MDM profiles, and then once it pulls down the MDM profiles, it gets through, it can enroll and pull down the agent, and then it'll start to kick off the rest of the enrollment that Ryan's built. So this also allows us to have the same experience for over-the-air enrollment versus DEP. So if DEP doesn't work for whatever case, or you're in a DEP or a non-DEP enabled country, you have the exact same experience once you go to setupmymac.ibm.com. So as soon as you run the quick add package, or you go through DEP, you'll have the exact same experience.
Sweet. Your IBM enrollment app, is that developed only by your Jamf admins? And how are you handling exception requests from, as written here, demanding users?
Sorry, how are we handling?
Exception requests from demanding users. How do you handle that?
Okay, like security exceptions, perhaps?
No, users who, I think what they're trying to get at is users who say, don't manage me.
Okay, so that's not really an option at IBM. It's not something that we've made not an option in terms of, we're just saying absolutely there's no way. Of course, by policy, you must be managed. But the other side of it is we provide really critical services to IBMers. We register your MAC address with the wired network. So if you plug a Mac in that hasn't been registered with us, it's not going to work on the wired network. If you try to connect to wireless, the only way to get a certificate is through us. If you want to go to VPN, not only do you have to have a certificate, but you also have to be registered as compliant in our database. So there's really no way to do your work as an IBMer without being registered in the JSS. That's really the only way to do it.
Excellent. With end-of-life machines, I know that Fletcher was talking a bit about this morning. What is your actual workflow there, and the question is, what do you do with end-of-life machines?
So keep in mind, our program is really young, so we're a little bit over a year actually. We actually launched June of last year. So we don't really have end of life yet. We do have employees obviously that go to other roles or leave the company. We have a cascade program in place where those come back in, they get wiped, they get cleaned up. They can go to other users, in which case once it's wiped either via MDM or locally, they'll go through the exact same process once they get that machine. And we also use those as service loaners and kind of other places, but it's not really a big issue for us yet just because we're so young.
Okay, and the next one was, you've mentioned several times that you don't use AD, Active Directory, it's just not a thing. And so is there a centralized user management system that you are using?
Yeah, so actually last year, I think at the event I met you at, in London, we had this long conversation about what AD is actually doing for you these days. So if you talk about directory services in general, and you talk about management of mobile devices, I think you really have to think about what services you're getting out of that. For us, we have, IBM makes a competing product to AD. We could have integrated with LDAP and, bound the machines, and we do obviously hook our JSS up to it. but we really let the JSS do the identity management. I mean, we have device certs, we have user certs, but the JSS knows who the user is, and so we can work around that without having to kind of push some of the bad experiences on the user in terms of binding the machine to LDAP. We also have single sign-on for the other systems, so it's not like you're signing in 20 times to 20 different systems, so that makes it easier as well.
Okay, and I believe this is going to be a reiteration from this morning's conversation. The question is, how many Macs do you have in total, and how large is the team that deployed the solution?
Sure, so we're at roughly 90,000 Macs today, and this is the entire Mac at IBM team in terms of engineering.
So nobody
Globally.
should submit a ticket right now, is what you're saying.
So actually, that brings up a good point. We are growing the team. We do continue to grow at kind of an alarming rate. If you look at the infrastructure diagrams, you see we're growing very quickly. So we are going to be hiring 2 additional engineers. We actually met JD last year at JNUC last year, and he agreed to come on the team. So you'll look on Jamf Nation. You'll see those posted hopefully in the next few weeks. We definitely invite you to apply or to find Danielle or myself this week. We'd be happy to chat with you.
Which rolls very nicely into our next question of, is your team here, are they dedicated to the Mac at IBM project, or do they have other responsibilities in the Windows, Linux, Android management world?
We are very, very lucky, having worked in kind of the Mac space for a long time. We are just Mac people. We are just Mac at IBM Engineering. We do work very closely with the rest of Workplace as a Service, Fletcher's team. We work very closely with the other teams, but we are strictly Mac at IBM Engineering.
And this probably goes back into your directory system question again. How are you authenticating at the DEP window?
So that hooks into LDAP. So since the JSS is bound to LDAP, it's using what you would authenticate to, say, even the over-the-air enrollment page. It's just LDAP.
And then have there been any challenges with allowing users to be admins on their computers?
So, of course, there are challenges, but I would say realistically, no. I mean, I don't think we have a lot of issues out of our users. One thing that's maybe a little bit different is I was a bit surprised. IBM, this has been the culture prior to Mac at IBM. So, I expected that we would come in and Mac at IBM would be really cool and we're going to be, admins for everyone. They've actually had this for a while on other platforms. So I think IBMers are used to having the responsibility. I think the Apple employees always say you don't want to solve an HR problem with IT, and that's kind of, I think, how IBM feels about it as well. We trust our employees to do the right thing, and they do. I mean, I really can't think of an issue where I've heard of something where someone has abused that right. Now, we do, of course, have tools and use Jamf to monitor what's being done, and we're working on some self-healing stuff and stuff like this. So, it's not all wild, wild west.
So I know that the Mac at IBM project is still relatively young, but I suspect you've already thought of a solution for this. But the question is, how do you deal with migrating user data if they do change computers?
Sure. So this was actually one of the first issues that we tried to tackle and we continue to work on. Again, the program's really young, so we don't really have people going Mac to Mac yet because the Mac users are going to have their machines for 3 to 4 years, so we haven't really seen that yet. But we do see users going from Windows to Mac. So one of the very first things we wrote prior to actually the launch of the program was a data migration tool. It's pretty simple. It relies a lot on the native Mac OS migration assistant. We just have some scripts that run up front to move some of the files in place on the Windows side to a place that it knows Mac OS, or the migration assistant rather, on Windows is going to grab. And then once those files are in that place, they're moved over to the Mac. There's another script that can run and determine that it's actually been run and move those files to the right place on the Mac.
All right, I grinned reading this question, so we'll see how you respond. Do you see Mac becoming a standard IBM platform in the future, i.e. reducing the Microsoft stack at all?
Do I see it becoming a standard?
Becoming the standard.
Only standard?
Sure.
I think, as Fletcher said this morning, I mean, really, we're trying to provide the best work experience to users in general. That doesn't mean forcing something on a user. We don't do that at all. As Fletcher showed you, we have a diagram that says, is a Mac right for me? We don't say the Mac is right for you. We actually list out all the problems with the Mac. We're very clear about it. You can go into the community. You can see any issues that we have. Even my team, we publish weekly, bi-weekly, and monthly updates in terms of what we're working on, what we've added. So I think, you've got a pretty clear idea of what you're getting with our platform, but we wouldn't want to force it on anyone. I mean, we'll continue if it's the best experience for our users. I mean, I think the number you saw from Fletcher was in the 70s in terms of what users would choose the Mac. So I think that's probably where we'll even out. We don't want to force it on anyone.
And this one, I know that we were talking about this a little bit before the session, kind of relates to your actual personal work environments with regards to, are you working in an office altogether? Are you home-based? How do you play with that?
So actually, the team, we're all in different places except for JD and Tom. So JD and Tom both work on QA and packaging together. So they're in one of the large IBM campuses. Everyone else is near to a major IBM location, so we can meet up, we can go into an office. Except for Pat, he's kind of in the middle of nowhere near here. But the rest of us are near a major IBM office because we do try to collaborate with the other teams as much as possible if needed.
I'm strategically located close to Jamf. That's
All right, we've got time for a few more questions here. Do you use any antivirus tools software, and why?
So when I started with IBM, we did actually use SEP. SEP was something that was on the Mac. Fortunately, there were a lot of folks, including Danielle, I think she was very against going with AV on the Mac, and then Kerry Thomas, who's our community leader, and he represents our community, he was pretty vocal that I think it needed to come off. And so we were able to have a conversation with security, talk about the real benefits of SEP on the Mac versus performance and other kind of user experience issues, and then talk about the native tools. And I think actually this is one of the best things that with our security team, we can really talk to them about the native tools. So a lot of times I think there's a lot of misinformation about what the Mac can do natively, and our security team really listens. And so we're able to talk about XProtect and Gatekeeper, and they were receptive. And so we don't use SEP unless it's required by a customer or some other reason that they need SEP on the device. It's available in the store, but it's not part of our standard install. We use XProtect really and Gatekeeper, and we collect some of the stats that we can via the JSS so that we can at least present data to security. And if there is a security outbreak or something, there have been a few times we'll try to run a report, and we haven't had any issues from this. I mean, Apple is protecting the platform already at the consumer level. There's no reason for anything else, in my opinion, on the enterprise level.
Okay, for your enrollment status pages, so the app that you have on first enrollment, what tools did you use to actually build that?
So we worked actually with a team to develop that. My team did not develop that directly. We designed it, the user experience. We had help from someone on Fletcher's team to actually do the kind of user interaction and what it would, the look and feel of it. We kind of came up with features, how it would interact with the JSS, but we did not write the code. All I can tell you is it's a native Swift application, but we did not write the code.
All right, and going back to talking about users being administrators on their computers, do you restrict them at all from installing external software outside of self-service?
Just Gatekeeper, like I said before. So Gatekeeper is turned on. You have to be a trusted developer, but that's it. Oh, yeah, you're right. So we do have, I think, 9 or 10 applications that security has asked us to blacklist for various reasons.
Okay, and actually rolling nicely into that, I don't know if you've encountered it, but how would you handle something like ransomware on your Macs?
So knock on wood, this has not been a problem for us yet, but we have engineered this in a way that it shouldn't be a problem, right? We have Code 42, we have Crash Plan, the devices are managed, a lot of the data is in the cloud via Box as well, and so if we do have an incident like this, wipe your computer, we don't care, wipe it away, and start over, and you should be back up and running within a half hour or so. So there's we protect, again, using the native Mac tools, but if it does happen, it shouldn't be an issue.
And is there anything that you lock down with profiles?
We are really lightweight. Ryan, how many do we have? Maybe 5?
Yeah, there's about 5 settings that we restrict, and the rest is kind of open to them to modify.
It's just the very, very basic stuff, screensaver, password. Yeah, it's just
firewall.
Very, very basic security requirements.
Okay, excellent. So I'd really like to thank Eric, Ryan, Patrick, Tom, Thomas, JD, and Eric for coming out and spending time with us today.